Taiwan is bursting with heaps of fun places to explore. Join me, Amber Hatfield, as I hit up travel hotspots, soak up some culture, and hunt down hidden gems. Let's go! Hi, and welcome back to Let's Go. Today we are going to dive into architecture, and specifically an exhibition that's currently showing at the Taipei Fine Arts Museum. So let's dive into how Taiwan transformed after World War II and what it meant. When the nationalist government moved from Nanjing to Taiwan in 1949, it brought a wave of mainland Chinese culture to the island, blending with the local way of life and replacing the earlier Japanese influence. This mix created a unique modern culture, but the journey wasn't smooth. Taiwan faced various challenges in terms of politics, society, religion, art, literature, industry, and technology. In this exhibition, architecture was used as a way to view these changes. Architecture reflects the shifts in Taiwan's culture and lifestyle from 1949 to 1983. This exhibition was broken down into 6 different themes: the influence of US aid, the return to Chinese retro styles, the rise of Chinese modernism, defining regional modernity, the outliers, and a new way of life. Each theme and section of the exhibit showcases how architecture mirrored the cultural and artistic trends of the time, and it ended with the completion of the Taipei Fine Arts Museum in 1983, a landmark for modern art in Taiwan. During the period of 1949 to 1983, the exhibition explains that 2 government policies shaped Taiwan's new cultural landscape. These were accepting US aid to stabilize society and introducing modern cultural experiences promoting Chinese culture while adopting anti-communist stances. This influenced public architecture. However, during this time, local architects were also experimenting with modern Chinese styles, and religious buildings by foreign missionaries and local artisans, along with the boom in commercial and real estate developments, showed the dynamic and innovative spirit of Taiwan's private sector. The exhibition, Modern Life Taiwan Architecture, shows how Taiwan transitioned from a politically tense period to a modern, freer society before martial law was lifted, and it illustrates how architecture and freedom are intertwined, concluding that for architecture to be free, life must be free. So Maryanne and I went to an exhibition at the Fine Arts Museum last week, and the exhibition was Modern Life Taiwan Architecture, 1949 to 1983. This exhibition has been running since March 23rd and will continue until the end of June 30th. The first section or room that you walk into is the Prelude, which basically talks about how in early post-war period, Taiwan's revitalization faced significant disruptions, and this led to a slowdown in construction activities. So this era had marked the shift from the pre-war Japanese construction system to the Republic of China system. And it talked about how Taiwan's provincial government's de-Japanization and re-Sinicization policy had deep and lasting effects on society. And then you enter into a section that's about influence of US aid on Taiwan's architecture. The exhibition here explains how Taiwan received economic aid from the US from 1951 to 1965 and consequently became integrated into the American cultural sphere, as they call it. Beyond defense and military supplies, this aid also encompassed various infrastructure developments, including industrial, agricultural, transportation, education, public health, public housing, city planning, and more. It explains how all government agencies were involved in managing this aid.
Right.
I thought this was quite interesting, although I didn't really find that there was that much information about how the aid influenced the architecture.
I think based on what I saw, the fact that US aid limited the quote-unquote architectural design influence in the sense that it was post-war and what was the priority at the time was restoration and then durability and get stuff up as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So that limited the amount of artistic flair, I suppose, that they could implement in their designs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why you see a lot of the block buildings.
Like cement.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. They just gave a brief description of the US aid, but like how it exactly influenced the architecture. I think there isn't much to talk about it because you ended up with a lot of very simple, durable buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next part of the exhibition went into the return to Chinese retro, which emerged in the early 20th century. And I quite liked this section.
Me too.
Of the exhibition because I think the architecture is just the look that I enjoy.
I would agree. I also am on the same page as you. I like that Chinese influence in buildings. And so this section was actually my favorite because you got to see a lot of the quote unquote more traditional Chinese styles. I say quote unquote because they say that the architects during this period added a modern twist. Since I'm not an architecture, nor do I have that background, I do not actually see the differences. But I quite like the look of the buildings.
Yeah. And one interesting part I thought about this section of the exhibition is that it had a really large window, and the window looks out onto the Grand Hotel, which was also part of the exhibition and built during this period, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was funny because right beside the window is a picture of the scene that you'll see outside the window.
Yeah. I thought that was quite cool. I liked how they brought the outside in.
Yes.
And they also did that at other parts in the exhibition, which we'll talk about later as well. So after going through the return to Chinese retro section of the exhibition, there is another part called Emergence of Chinese Modern. This section of the exhibition talked about how Chinese modern architecture in Taiwan began with a few architects who didn't have official support or really kind of rarely interacted with each other. They rejected the idea of copying traditional Chinese architecture or adopting Western styles. And instead, they aimed to promote this Chinese culture by blending traditional Chinese elements with modern design, creating this unique and distinctly Chinese form of modern architecture.
To be honest, from this part onwards, I got confused. Meaning, like, I didn't really see the architectural influence, and I pretty much felt that the next few parts of this exhibit would mean more if you actually understood architecture, because it became very technical for me. Meaning they were talking about, the different influences and why this architect is renowned and what was very specific in his design. And yeah, I just got lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see the models. Like, one of the things I appreciated about this exhibit is they actually had small scale models of the different buildings. And I could appreciate that, but I could not appreciate the architectural design, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. In the Emergence of Chinese Modern section of the exhibit, I remember that they talked about the Donghai University in Taichung, which has the chapel, the interesting kind of pyramid-shaped chapel. I quite liked that. That was one of the buildings that kind of stuck out to me as having interesting architecture that I liked.
One of the other things that I also liked about this exhibit as a whole was they had videos interspersed with the models and the pictures. And the videos, like with the Donghai University, the university in Taichung, they would actually film the surrounding of the area. So even if you're not there, you actually get an idea of what the look and feel of the area is. That's one of the things I appreciated about this.
Yeah. And adding on to that, I also liked that the videos, they also had interviews with different professors and different people who are experts in architecture or have a particular knowledge of that period of time. So I thought that was interesting to have them talking as well. And maybe extra useful because it is quite technical in certain aspects. Like beside each picture of the different architecture and different buildings, they would have these explanations of how it was built and what the architect was trying to convey with the building.
Yes.
And those kind of parts were really technical, like you said before. So it was a little bit hard to grasp.
Right. So I agree with you on that bit. I also learned quite a lot from the videos because they would also go into like the historical context a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Proceeding to walk through the exhibition, the next section was called Regional Modernity in Taiwanese Architecture. This section explained how since the late 1950s, Taiwan has undergone rapid economic growth, urban expansion, and significant social change. It highlights that these shifts led to a development of the regional modernity in architecture, meaning that, unlike styles focusing on national pride, this approach highlights everyday experiences from individuals and groups, combining influences from Europe, America, and Japan. This section explores how these changes have shaped Taiwan's architectural landscape. The Center for American Studies, which is now the Library Institute of European and American Studies at Academia Sinica, this building, was included in this part of the exhibition, as was the Taipei Fine Arts Museum itself. Another section of the exhibition focused on what they called outliers, which were works that were supposed to stand out from the mainstream design trends of the time. And these creations were often done by foreign or local architects, but they reflect the designer's expression and imagination. One of the buildings included in this section was the Lingxiao Shrine at the Zhinan Temple. The Zhinan Temple is located in Wenshan District in Taipei, and it is one of the most renowned Taoist monasteries. The Lingxiao Temple is highest on a mountain. The highest rooftop of the building is designed in a southern China's Minnan culture style with carved dragons and phoenixes. And then the second layer of the roof features a more northern design with animal figures and deities on clouds. It's certainly a very beautiful building. What other buildings or architecture stood out to you, Maryanne?
Like I remember one of the examples they used was this church, and the person who designed it had a German background.
Mm-hmm.
And you could see that influence in his design. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. Thinking about what the exhibition made me think of, or what it kind of stirred up, is that some of these buildings don't really look like what I consider as architecture. It's kind of interesting to think what architecture is, because it's not really something that you normally think about. Like for me at least, when I see a building, I don't really consider like all that has gone into planning or making the plans for that building. You know, what's the space looks like, what materials they've used, the angles, the size, the shapes and everything. I don't normally think about like what's gone into it. So for me, it was kind of interesting in certain areas that I would see a building, which in Taiwan, I would just typically think is just a normal building. It doesn't really look like that much thought has gone into it.
Right.
But it has, apparently.
Yeah, I would agree, because one example that comes to mind is one of the models that was shown at the exhibit. It was interesting because the architect wanted to have a wave in the design. It was a design for the school. And because you know how the schools here, they have these, balconies?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have the classrooms and then you have like an area that connects to the outside.
Yeah.
But it's like a balcony of sorts. And the students the walkways, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And the walkway was in a wave. But if you didn't realize it was deliberate on the part of the architect, you probably would think like they built it crooked. You know what I mean? Because from the front of the building, you would see how it goes. It's not a straight balcony, I suppose. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's those like little details that you might think that this is just a mistake. Or, yeah. But actually, it's on purpose. In In the final section of the exhibition, it focused more on the changes in Taiwanese lifestyle brought about by economic growth and urbanization. It explains how in 1956 only 33% of the population lived in cities, and by 2000 this had already soared to 78%. So with this, people's expectations for higher quality of living grew. So housing became a crucial issue, and how people responded to their social challenges really shaped a new way of life. It explained a little bit about how the private sector's influence on architecture outpaced the public sector, that there was a gradual commercialization of the architectural profession. Really began to gradually overcome the architectural profession.
One of the things I remember from that specific part of the exhibit is they had a black and white picture where you would see this tall building in contrast to like the normal housing at the time, which is the one-story traditional buildings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of jarring where you see suddenly in the midst of all this, one-story building, this huge tall building that stands out.
Uh-huh.
And I thought that was actually quite interesting, and I think I would have wanted to see more pictures of the same vein, because I think that would very much make it clear on the trajectory of the change. It was also interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, it was during that exhibit that they also started talking about urban planning,
Mm-hmm.
where suddenly you have this influx of people living in small areas. They were talking about this building that had the first garbage chute and things like that, and how you now had to plan the area where people would live in to incorporate like parks and things like that. And I also found that part fascinating.
Yeah. I remember there being a few communities that they talked about.
Right.
Communities that were kind of based on more of a US kind of style, with houses on a row and then a cul-de-sac on a cul-de-sac. And so it becomes almost like a very social thing. So people can be out of their houses and then won't be cars. And it becomes like a social kind of meeting area for people. And I was just quite surprised when I saw that, because it's really not typical to see houses arranged in this way in Taiwan. Are there any other things that you want to say about the exhibition? How do you feel that it was curated or displayed? Was there anything that you think you would change?
Not having grown up in Taiwan or not knowing much about the history of Taiwan, I wish they included also a little bit more context. In the sense that I understand the exhibition started from 1949, which is when the nationalist government left China and came to Taiwan. But I think it would have been nice to also just have a short description of what it was like before.
That's all for this week's episode of Let's Go, and mine and Maryanne's take on the Modern Life Taiwan Architecture exhibition at the Fine Arts Museum. Go check it out. See you next time.